Bonnie. My name is Mary Catherine DeVoy. My married name is DeVoy, but my maiden name was Nertoli. My Anishinaabe name is Ashkiwabaganique, Makwadodem, Baoting Dida. My family, my Dodem, we're from Sisabakat, Minising, Sugar Island, Bear Clan. And that's a Bear Clan name I hold too. I was named by an old dear friend of mine, passed away a long time ago, Joe McWanabe. He lived in Hannahville at the time, but he was from up the road in Sagamok. Yeah. Actually, ironically, Gerard is his nephew. My mom was Lucille Nertoli. Everybody remembered, they called her Aunt Lou. The Nertoli is from my dad's side. He was from Italy. And yeah, we grew up here in the Sioux. My dad came here. He immigrated to the U.S. when he was 11, and went into the Army, and when World War II was over, he ended up here, and the rest is history. Got a bunch of siblings, and here we are. So I grew up down in the West End. There were two parts of the town that were where most Anishinaabes lived, and one was the West End, and the other one was Shunk Road. So some of my relatives, my sisters, lived down here, and I grew up in our house, our family home on Grocap on the West End. I was a West Ender. So there's a bunch of us that were the Pavlots, the Fishes, there's our family, and Sinettes, and all kinds of, it was like a little community. So that's where I grew up. But I spent a lot of time down here in Shunk Road too with my sister. My sister was Barb, and her husband, Ed Pine. My dad died when I was young, so it was Ed or Pie. Everybody called him Pie. That's a Pine story. He was a Pine. They all had nicknames, and Pie was his. He didn't even know why he got called that, but he kind of took that role with me, and I'm real grateful for that because he taught me a lot in my lifetime. I remember just being a little small girl, and we would go to the Sugar Bush. Every year there was Sugar Bush. A lot of good times and stories and a lot of teachings, all of that. I learned how to do it all. There was like a pecking order. You know, when you were younger, you hauled sap and hauled sap and hauled sap for years and years. Finally, they let you cut wood and watch the fire. And then I got to be the one to go and start the fire in the morning. And I was a grown adult woman before Pi would leave me alone with the finish off the syrup. 20 years it took me to get there. So that was a real high point that I remember when I was growing up. But the other thing I remember doing a lot was with my mother, Lucille. She was the oldest daughter in her family. Well, she was the oldest, period. And let's see, and I was her youngest. So she was almost 40 when I was born, so I was like the tail end of the family. And by the time I came along, they were close to being grown up. So she used to haul me around, and it was kind of her duty as the oldest daughter, I guess. She would go around, I think, and check on all the aunties and uncles on Shunk Road and Sugar Island, too. My family was from Sugar Island. My mom was born, or there used to be a house or cabin. There's a cabin there now, it's not the same one, but it was right on the corner, kitty corner from where the church is, and where you take the road, you get off the Bayshore Road and you go down to, it was Ed's for many, many years. Okay, right there was her grandma's house, and that was the house she was born in. And the village, Badiwasi at that time was, even when I was younger, there was a lot more houses and people lived there, and it was, they all said it was a really thriving little community for years. And yeah, that's where she was from. Yeah, and there were the Gurnals over there, and I don't know, all these aunties and uncles that we would, and Angeline, they were, or, you know, she must have been a great something, aunt or grandparent, could have been, because you called them all aunt and uncle back then. And even some of them that, as it turns out, they weren't really actually your aunt and uncle, but out of respect, that's what you called them. There was Musco, geez, I can't remember most of their names. But, you know, different parts of the island would go on weekends and visit and check in on them. And the one we spent the most time with was my Aunt Mary Murray, the one that the camp is named after her. She was actually my aunt, my great aunt. She was my grandfather's youngest sister. There was like 13 of them or something like that. And her and Uncle Fred were the youngest ones. Her maiden name was Hatch. And she married Uncle Bill, and of course, she took his name, Murray. And, oh, that was a smart old lady. She had a memory that was like no other. I talk about her a lot. She was a huge influence on my life. And she was like my grandma, because my grandparents, all my grandparents, except for my grandfather, Louis Hatch, he lived to maybe I was 5, if that long, not sure. But anyway, all my other grandparents had passed away before I was born. My dad's parents passed away when he was only, 2 and 3, because they were caught up in some war or something going on in his homeland. They were killed. So Aunt Mary kind of took the grandma role for me. And, I tell you, I could do no wrong. A lot of times she would say, oh no, Kathy wouldn't do that. And I was doing it. It was just nice to have somebody stand up for you like that. They just had faith in you. Spent a lot of time at her house. My mom would work or had to go do things, and I get to stay overnight at Aunt Mary's. And she taught me things that she learned from her grandfather, that he learned from his grandfather. And yeah, and I mean, we're talking, I finally kind of thought about some of the things she said, and I figured out a timeline. And these old guys lived in the 1800s, early 1800s, when they were being forced to sign treaties like the 36 and the 55 and all of that. And they had incredible memories, must have been on that side of the family, because he told her things that, stories she related to me. She said, you're never going to find this in a history book, because they're not going to write about it, She's, she was a pretty interesting old lady. Told me lots of stories, things that happened, trips that the old chiefs and that would make to D.C. and Washington, D.C. and stuff like that. And nothing came of it, of course, not for years and years. Because after we gave the state of Michigan and the U.S. government what they wanted, they were, we were on our own. So, but I always like to remember them talking about, how they had to sign away most of the state. And I never learned this till much later on, and until recently too, because I was I was reading the treaty, the 1836 and the 55, because I was trying to find the names of our old chiefs for a ceremony we have. And I mean, I'd read that treaty before, but it just didn't sink in, you know, I didn't understand it very well. But and it was right there in that treaty, they were talking about spots they were going to send us to live if we didn't. Missouri was one. It's like, Missouri? What the heck's in Missouri? We'd ended up probably in Oklahoma like everybody else with that removal act, because that's ultimately what they were trying to do, was get us out of the way. But our chiefs outsmarted them in a way, because when they retained those fishing and hunting and gathering rights, that's what we had to live off of, you know. And at the time, they didn't realize what was up here, and it was enough to sustain us until they started trying to fool around with that too. But anyway, yeah, I'm rambling. So I grew up around a family that was real active in our tribe before we became a tribe. By the government standards. So I remember being a little girl, my mom would go to all the Indian meetings, that's what they called them, at Fred Hatch's house. Of course I had to go. So a lot of times I remember just being really young, it's just flashes of things, but I used to sit under the kitchen table in Uncle Fred's kitchen while these really old people, they look so old to me, I figure I must have been 3 or 4 at the time, we're busy talking. So I'd be sitting under there playing with the pots and pans and the cookies. Or in the living room watching baseball, I think it was, yeah, with Philemon. That was his housekeeper, he called her. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, that was my my growing up years, and going around visiting all the relatives and, you know, picking berries and all of that stuff. And I remember too, one of the things that we used to do, and it's always stood out in my mind because one of the things, you know, I've come to know that our people were very famous for were to, you know, everything that we did in terms of a culture had to be hidden away, because we would be ridiculed, we could have been arrested, all kinds of things like that, for practicing our ceremonies, our way of life, even speaking the language. But and I remember being in 4th grade, and I don't know what we were talking about, the topic, but we got around to ceremonies, not tribal ceremonies. I went to a Catholic school, by the way. I'm a Catholic school survivor. Not proud of having been there. That's another story. But they were talking about different traditions of burial and things like that. I think that was the topic. And so it came around to me. Of course, I had to raise my hand and say something. And I said, well, maybe the topic was picnics. I don't know. I said, you know, my family has a picnic annually. We all go down to the cemetery where our relatives are buried, and we have a big picnic. And they looked at me like I was a ghoul. Yeah. And I learned really quickly never to bring that up again, because, oh my God, the teasing I got. Like, what kind of picnic do you go have in a cemetery? Well, that was just what we did, and I know now what we were doing. I remember them going around putting stuff on the graves, and it wasn't flowers either, just little coins or little bits of food. Or Aunt Mary told me one time they even, there was a particular relative liked this certain drink. It was wild turkey. And they'd go and pour some on the grave for them and stuff like that. So, we were feeding our ancestors is what we were doing. And I guess other families still had their Jibakwe, what we call that, ghost feast. But they always had it on All Saints' Day because it was a Catholic holiday and they could hide the practice on that day. And so I remember Pa told me when I was a little kid, he said, you can do that any time of the year. You should do that more than one time a year. But, he understood that they had to keep it secret because there were still Indian agents around, and there were still, God only knows what would happen if somebody was caught doing all this pagan stuff, That's what they considered it. So, yeah, that was our families. And they always would crack out a few beers later on too. But, that was life back then, It wasn't a cardinal sin if you had a beer or something like that. Not as a kid, but yeah. Some of my uncles would really like to drink, and my aunties. I won't mention their names. Bless them. Some of their pictures are up there too, but that was how the life was back in the 60s and all of that. So I think when I was here last with you, I left off talking about what I remember from the Marshunk lawsuit, I guess it was. And I don't know if I'm remembering it all accurately, but I remember that Barb, my sister, my oldest sister, gave me a copy of that much later. And she lived down here on 9th Avenue, right off Shunk. And there's relatives, or I'm not sure what you call relatives that were in-laws more than still relatives. The Pine family lived up and down that street. And their offshoots, McKechnie's and all that, they still live there. But back in 1968, I guess, this is how it was related to me, and I read the thing too, but the city of Sault Ste. Marie had been receiving, I think, HUD funds, some kind of urban renewal funds or something, to do repairs of parts of town that were considered substandard. And of course, the part of town that most Indians lived in at this end anyways was the Shunk Road area, because in the war years, a lot of tribal families had to move uptown from the island because they didn't have their men were off fighting wars. There was nobody to go hunt and fish and do all that. So the families had to come uptown and find a place to live and all of that. So that's how come they said, see, this land was worthless to the city because the carbide was there. I mean, that's what do they call those, super sites these days? Yeah, toxic, They didn't care, if we came and lived down here. So that's what the Shunk Road area was. And I don't know what the status of that is, but when something's a super site, it never totally goes away. It was a dump site from the carbide and the tannery and all of those businesses, those old businesses that brought people here. Anyway, one of the things they didn't have down here is running water or sewer. So everybody had an outhouse. There were ditches, that was, I just remember ditches because I thought those were the funnest place in the world to play. And everybody was poor. Everybody was the same. There's, nobody was wealthy living down here or on the West End either. But kids played in that was the funniest thing in the world, to go play in those ditches with the minnows and make little bridges, and I'd be up to my knees in them, and so that's what it was. But then they came to find out, when they got that money, it was supposed to be for putting in sewers, roads, actual roads, and of course water mains. And they didn't do it. Their solution to fixing the road was putting one of those orange barriers in place so you can't, go down there. I remember I was a little bit older, because this still, I don't know when this was settled. I just remember it started in 68, the first initial report about it. And when they tested the water and stuff in the ditches, it was full of TB and all kinds of different things. And I spent my childhood playing in that. I was just like, oh my God. All kinds of things. But I was in high school by the early 70s. And back then, they gave you a license when you were 16. A license, not a permit. I started getting my license when I was 15. So anyway, my mom had this big old Buick. And she didn't like to drive. She'd drive, but she wasn't fond of it. So she'd let me drive her to work, and then I could have the car to go to school in that. And I remember I had a group of friends. There was the Buzwas, the Pavlots, we were all niche kids anyways. And we were non-discriminatory. Well, my very best friend was Lebanese. She was a king. Anyway, they had programs. It was the 70s now. We're talking Johnson O'Malley Act and all that. So they were getting money to do programs for Indians down here. So they did them out of the church over here. And we were making crafts and things like that. So I go pick up everybody, and we'd come down here. But the problem was that in the springtime, the roads were so bad, it was easy for your car to slip into one of the sinkholes there. But we were used to that. So my big old heavy Chevy Buick, we get stuck in a rut or a hole, and then the guys would jump out and they go in the back, pick the car up, and off we go. That was life on Marquette and Shunk. Yeah, happened a lot. So, so I guess by the time that was settled, I think I was a teenager. It was the early 70s. And the next thing you know, we're getting some roads down here, and I don't remember much else about it. I know eventually, my sister had sewer and water. But it was the people down here actually won against the city, and they had to, or they would have been in federal court, because it was the government, the U.S. government, on our behalf, and I think they sued the city. That's what went. And it wasn't long after that. Let me see. The tribe sought recognition. I don't remember what year that was. And then they decided that they would buy all this land up and start a housing site for the tribal people. And then hit the fan there. Yeah. There were a lot of people in the city I mean, wouldn't it have been logical? They limited us to living down here anyway, but the fact that we had it in trust, and all of a sudden they didn't like that. And it got pretty spicy around here sometimes, you know. I remember the height of it was when Verna Lawrence, one of our own tribal people, supposedly, was doing everything in her power to, the city was trying to sue the tribe. Of course, I don't think we were a tribe then, but yeah, to stop construction of the houses down here. And they kept us in court so long, you know, that I think initially from HUD or someplace like that, we were granted enough funds for 166 houses. And by the time they settled the lawsuit, or the case, which we won, the tribe won, this is after we'd been federally recognized, we only had the funds for 88, you know, because the cost of everything had gone up so much time had passed. So that would have been a huge boost to our tribal folks. So I graduated in '66 and went on to college. And I tried to be a nurse because, well, it doesn't matter why. I couldn't pass chemistry. I couldn't get a high enough grade. You had to have like an A+ in that to get into nursing school. It just wasn't going to happen for me because that was not my forte. But I did have another one, which was something instilled in me and Aunt Mary and my mom, and that was the history of our folks. So that's what I did. Majored in history. And that was really insightful. I learned a lot from this one professor. It was his area of study with Native Americans. And this is back in the day. They didn't have Native study programs or anything like that. He used to let me do research in whatever topic I wanted to. I remember one of my research papers was in Charlie Kabogum. That was my senior paper, was about him and his life. That was interesting. Came in handy recently. But because I lived in Marquette, that's why it interested me. He's a cool little guy. Lived to be 102. Yeah, it's amazing, eh? And so I went on to become a teacher. You know, got my education, teaching certification on top of the degree. And for the most part, except for a few years at a local school here, I taught in tribal schools. So my last school was Ojibwe Charter School out in Bay Mills. So, which was great, really great. I did a lot of things. My classroom was outside a lot. We brought things back into the community. My kids, my students, that was a K through 12 school. That's when we brought back snow snake games, which is a very old game that, you know, they used to have tournaments and things like that. So we got that tradition started and got it started over here too. And I came over here after I retired. But I used to have those kids outside tapping trees and hauling syrup or not syrup, they wish they could haul syrup, sap, and yeah, it was cool. So I had kids in between. I used to do Powwow Trail for many years, probably from the time I was, well, even before college. I started dancing when I was about 14. my Aunt Patsy's or Rita Bushore, her urging. I had other aunties too that taught me to do many things. Aunt Patsy did a lot of beadwork and quill work and all of that. And then I learned to, do beadwork from Harriet Shedwin and my sister Barb, I think Nelson Champagne, or I can't remember for sure if that's his name. He lived next down here on Shunk, and he taught Barb how to do it, my sister. So, there's a lot of that around. And, when you're learning stuff like that, at least the way I see it anyway, you're an artist. But you can't do it all the time, so you got to kind of choose your area. So mine was more, although I did learn to do those things, and with a little refresher, I still can go back and do them. But I'm more into the sewing. My mom used to make all my clothes, and I thought she loved to sew, but came to find out when I finally went and signed up for home ec in junior high and knew how to sew already, that was it. She never made another dress for me after that. But that's okay, because I knew how to do it. Because she had to battle with the teacher about bringing home my project because they wanted to make aprons and stupid skirts, and I was in the public school by then, thank God. But yeah, I was really lucky I didn't. And my mom's family too, or at least her sisters, didn't have to experience the whole boarding school thing, because that was awful. There's a lot of people around here that did, though. Pi told me stories one time of, there were some young men that were sent to, well, I think one of them was his brother, Freddie Moon, was sent to, I think it was either Harbor Springs or Mount Pleasant, which is even further. And they didn't like it there, so they walked back. Can you imagine walking back from Harbor Springs or even Mount Pleasant? But I remember we were in a workshop talking about that one time, and there were several relatives of men who had done that, walked back. But they figured out that they had help along the way. They would go walk along the shoreline. Then there was Harbor Springs. There was an Indian settlement there. Go a little further on, there was another one. They probably had some help getting home. But still, what a journey that would have been. No money, just the clothes on their back. And then the risk that the agents would turn around and come back and get them. Yeah. So that was an awful era. So they talk about finding all these graves of children at these schools. I had, I won't mention names, but I had a friend of mine, she was elder. She passed away a while ago. She talked about how, and this was at Shingwak, which I don't know if our kids went over there from, I wouldn't think so, because they never sent you too close to your home res. Could be too easy to run away. But her sister and her went there, and her sister, one of the nuns, got angry with her for some reason, pushed her down the stairs. Bad head injuries. And for the rest of her life, she was disabled, mentally disabled. You can see, yeah, when something didn't go right there. But I digress. So I got a chance being on the Powwow Trail, and I was moving around, working in different schools that were in different tribal communities. And that was a huge part of my life. I lived in Keweenaw Bay, wonderful place to live, really good people. I can't say that for every place I lived, but yeah, back in that day it was great. Made lots of friends. They had a drum, taught lots of kids to dance, taught lots of moms how to sew and make regalia, and did the same thing every place I lived. And yeah. So anyway, I'm trying to think of anything else. Got a chance to go and take part in a lot of ceremonies. That was really important to me. Because it isn't all about powwow, it's, things like that. That's a gateway to learning about our way. That's how I always call it, it's a gateway. But it opens the doors, to a new style of being, or not style, but the way of being an Anishinaabe. Because along with those kind of things, there's a way of life you learn, which is, I think over the years has gotten a lot stronger even. Especially with so many of our young people are they're not drinking or drugging because it doesn't go with our way of life. And if you're doing that with this way of life, you're doing it wrong. It's not going to last for you, or you're not going to see the good side of it. But it just seems more and more, I see that in the young people, and I think that's just wonderful. So I had to laugh. Somebody asked me, we have this New Year's Eve sobriety powwow now. Now it's what? See, this is 25. It's going on 35 or more years, 40. And somebody asked me, well, how many years have you been sober? I looked at him, I said, you know what? I don't know how many years I've been sober. Did you just quit? No. I said, when I started following these ways, when I was towards the end of my college career, I guess, that's somewhere in there I just decided I didn't want to drink because I wanted to follow, I wanted to go a certain way in my life, and alcohol isn't part of it. So it's like, I don't know. And I know a lot of people like that. They've been sober so many, because it just ain't a thing, It's just it has never been part of my life. So thank God I don't want to have to go through treatment and things like that. That's hard. It's a hard thing to do. I really admire people that when they need to do it and they do it and stick to it. Holy jeez. They're warriors. They're brave ones. So I got a chance to travel around to different reservations and go to different ceremonies, meet a lot of people, fall in love a couple hundred times. So now I am I'd retired once. I finally retired from teaching back in 2021. Yeah. And 2 weeks later, I took this job here as a cultural director. So, yeah. My first retirement was brief. It's changed a lot. There's definitely a lot more pride in who you are. Because, during those times when, all that stuff was going on with fighting the people about getting this tract of land for houses, and at the same time we call them the fish wars. They were trying to fight us in court about fishing rights and that. I mean, I remember walking down Ashman Street and people would cross a street so they didn't have to be by a Anishinaabe. That's what life was like. And the awful, hateful things that they would call you. And just before it was getting settled, in the months and years before, they were getting a settlement. I was in college, and I had my nieces, and we were, that would be like Deb and Maria and, the girls, the rest of the girls. Got several others, Priscilla. I would take them for the summer, and we'd go travel around to different powwows. And I remember these powwows we liked to go to in Wisconsin and Minnesota, because I was living over in Hannibal at the time. We were on the other end of the peninsula, so it wasn't such a bad drive. So I'd pile them in the car, and we'd go. And we had to be really careful to make sure you had a full tank of gas, because if you're had to go through certain parts of Wisconsin to get where you wanted to go, you'd better be able to make a straight shot without stopping, because you weren't welcome in these towns and villages. And actually, I think that was more in the 80s or mid 80s, because we were already concluding ours in terms of that first consent decree, but they were still going at it. And they had anti-Indian groups, and they were at landings. I never did any of that there anyways, but it could get pretty dicey. Yeah. Then I had a niece, I just figured, she can't grow up without having to go to one protest. And so I took her over to, I can't even remember what we were protesting, but there was something at Garden River where they were starting the railroads and all those things like that. So it's like, come on, you might not, things are looking good. You might not get another protest in your lifetime. So I took her to a protest. Got to be at one once. As it is, she's had many. Lots of traditions, only we didn't know they were traditions. It was just the way we did things. And that's what my mom and I, when I first started following this Anishinaabe way, I think I was like maybe in my, just starting, finished high school, starting college, things like that. And, like I had said before, she was Catholic. But they didn't have a choice back then of being anything but Catholic or some Christian faith, because if they didn't, they were really treated badly. And because we were considered pagan or, I don't know, something. We just didn't live the right way. So, we grew up following, we didn't have as they would say back then, we didn't have the beads and feathers. But we had the way of going and seeing those elders, making sure that they had what they needed, having those feasts, offering something to our loved ones, saying a prayer for them. And there was all kinds of things like that that reflected more of the truth and how we treated each other. It reflected more what the teachings of our ancestors taught us, so that when I came up at a time when there was a real revival of our tribal ways. I mean, you're talking Wounded Knee, Alcatraz, all these different things going on, one after another. Then we had our own fish wars up here, the blockades, and all kinds of different stuff. The first powwow, because Aunt Mary and Mom used to talk about those things, but they had to talk about them in a really hushed manner. They didn't want me to hear of the things that they knew went on, probably ceremony. I remember Aunt Mary said, "Oh, you could hear those drums way off in a distance in the island." She said, "When I was growing up." Well, Aunt Mary was born in 1906, So, they were still hanging on, but they couldn't let anybody know about it. And so, yeah, things were passed on to us. So that when I finally told her, I said, Mom, I'm not going to church anymore. I don't believe in that way. I said, I know the history behind it. And I'd share it with her as time went on, as I learned more, because I had professors that, let me pretty much follow whatever path of learning that I took in terms of history major. And yeah, that's how that went. So I learned early on during a very tumultuous time about our true story, as well as that of many other tribes. So it wasn't just our story. By making it a priority, they've made strides in having a language and culture department, and they just added people on for the outer lying areas, and I take my hat off to them for doing that. But we need a really intensive effort at the language. Can't rely on getting grants. They're so difficult to write grants, and I know I'd asked for a grant writer before, and because you can't. It's not a job where you can focus on that and write these grants. They're very difficult, time-consuming. But that's not even the issue. We have to just make a very critical look at that, very specific things that we could be doing. And I thought at one time when we started the school, I was one of the people that helped on that first committee and school board committee and all of that, but that we were making, that was an effort, but there were things that happened, and it didn't happen that way. But I think that what we have to start with is at first an immersion school, but that costs money. We have very few speakers of our own now, from our own community, I mean. And none of them are, if there are any, they're not very young. And there's just so much to do. I have one young lady that she's originally from Wikwamacong, and she moved up here to take care of her mother and stepfather. And when she walked in the door and looking for a job one day, it was like lights shone down from the heaven. And it's like, are you a fluent speaker? Well, I'm kind of. And I thought, she was a fluent speaker. She was just being humble. So I was like, God, we got to keep her. And she's young, she's barely over, I won't, because everybody will know who I'm talking about and what her age is. But she's young. We'll leave it at that. I don't know how to answer that, because in my mind, that's all I've ever been. I always remember my little niece, Priscilla. She just passed on. Something she said to me one time. Like I said, I used to pile the kids in, and we go to piles, but we also went to ceremony. And these ceremonies are way back in the bush, up we went at this time. We were going to Hannahville, and you know how we have different. The fun parts for kids is always the giveaways and the good food you get to eat and stuff like that. And we were going to ceremony this time, and she leans over the front seat and she says, "Auntie, I really feel sorry for white people." I said, "You do?" I said, "How come?" She's very thoughtful in her little 5-year-old frame of mind. And she said, "Well, you know how we have giveaway?" "Yeah." "We have giveaway all the time, you know. And they only have it once a year. They only have it at Christmas." I like being Anishinaabe. And it's like, yeah, that's what she, that was funny. But to me, that was like kind of profound. Not so much that it was the giveaway, but it's just that it's the way she is with it. She was with her belief, you know. She felt she wasn't mad at them. She felt sorry for them. I feel sorry for white people. It's like, it's just how it is when you live this way, you know. We have different customs, and yeah. And I had another. I have lots of moments in my life, but there was another one too that's was really profound to me. I was teaching at Red Yard, and back in those days, there were a lot of not so nice attitudes about Indians. And I had in my classroom, and I was hired there to teach Native American culture. So yeah, I had a couple classes, 2 or 3 classes a day, and one was more of a senior class, and I had a lot of non-tribal kids sign up for it because I think they thought it was going to be a bird class, easy A. But they found out different. They found out way different. And one of the things I always stressed right from the start of the class was that someday they may leave this small village, Red Yard, and they may, because a lot of them had a history of going into armed services there. I said, you may go in the Marines, you may go into the Army, or end up some far away place, and there's going to be people that aren't like you, that have a different belief system. And you have to learn to keep an open mind about new ways of life so that you can, I put it nicely, like you can adapt and all that stuff like that. I said, I was thinking to myself, so you don't get the shit kicked out of you. You know, but that was, you know. And years later, in Walmart, this young man came up to me and he says, Mrs. DeVoy. I think I was still Nertol. No, I was DeVoy. Mrs. DeVoy. And I didn't recognize him because, of course, they all remember you, but I have hundreds to remember. And I said, you remember me from Red Yard? It's like, oh, yeah, because he still had the really fiery red hair. And he said, you know what? I just had to tell you. You taught me the one thing that was most important from that school. And I said, what was that? He said, is to be open-minded about other people. And he said, that's the one thing that really stuck with me. Because I went into the Marines, and you were so right. There were so many different kinds of people with ways of thinking. And I had to respect them all. And I thought, that's a good way. Yeah. Didn't have to like them all, but I respected their way. I don't know, it's like I told you when we first started. I can remember things that happened when I was 3 to 4 years old and my old home telephone number, but can't remember the password I made yesterday. I don't know, just be good to one another, love this earth, save this earth, even in little ways. because, I'm getting closer to that ancestor side. And people start to leave you. So you have to enjoy them, enjoy being with them for the time that you have, and teach them what you can and learn from them, even the youngest ones. They have a lot to teach you still. I have a granddaughter, Luna, that's just precious. And she comes up with things all the time. And our kids teach our kids to, kids see things that we don't, because they're so close from being with the Creator, being in that spirit world. Their spirit is from the spirit world. So listen to what they see and what they know. Because as they grow older, they lose the ability to do that. I remember Luna, when she was 4 or 5 years old, would go out and pick all kinds of stuff in the woods. She'd put it in a pail and she'd be stirring it out there. And anybody else would tease her about being a witch or something, but not us. What are you doing out there, hon? Oh, I'm making medicine with Aunt Bubba. That was Barb's nickname from the kids, Bubba. Ah. And she didn't know. Barb was a nurse. And one of the things she did was collect a lot of knowledge about natural medicines. So I have no doubt that it was who she was talking to. Was her Aunt Bubba? Barb Pine? Yeah. And, listen to those children, especially, and make sure that what they're seeing and learning is the right path, You can't control all that, but you can certainly brush the path a little bit. I don't know, that's all I can think of right now. That one took me by surprise.